am live. I'm reading The Comedians. It's a novel by Greene, published in 1966. The comedians are Mr. Smith, the presidential candidate, Major Jones, he calls himself Major Jones, and the story is told by Mr. Brown. It largely plays in Haiti, and we are here in chapter 2 now. It's the second part of the book, and it's Roman 1. I have not told them at dinner that a rich man had been found and a voodoo ceremony was to take place that night, somewhere on the mountains above Kenskov. It was Joseph's secret, and he had only confided in me because he needed a lift in my car. If I had refused, I'm sure he would have tried to drag his damaged limb the whole way. The hour was past midnight. We drove some 12 kilometers, and when we left the car on the road behind Kenskov, we could hear the drums beating very gently like a laboring pulse. It was as though the hot night there lay out of breath. Ahead was a thatched hut, open to the winds, a flicker of candles, a splash of white. This was the first and the last ceremony I was to see. During the 2 years of prosperity, I had watched, as a matter of duty, the voodoo dances performed for tourists. To me, who had been born a Catholic, they seemed as distasteful as the ceremony of the Eucharist would have seemed performed at a ballet on Broadway. I only went now because I owed it to Joseph, and it is not the voodoo ceremony I remembered with most vividness, but the face of Philippot on the opposite side of the tunnel, paler and younger than the Negro faces around him. With his eyes closed, he listened to the drums which were beating softly, clandestinely, insistently, by a choir of girls in white. Between us stood the pole of the temple, stuck up like an aerial to catch the passage of the gods. A whip hung there in memory of yesterday's slavery, and a new legal requirement, a cabinet photograph of Papa Doc, a reminder of today's. I remembered how young Philippot had said to me in reply to my accusation, "The gods of Dahomey may be what we need." Governments had failed him. I had failed him. Jones had failed him. He had no Bren gun. He was here, listening to the drums, waiting for strength, for courage, for a decision. On the earth floor around a small brazier, a design had been drawn in ashes, the summons to a god. Was it a summons to Lekba, the gay seducer of women, to sweet Erzuli, the virgin of purity and love, to Ogun Ferrai, the patron of warriors, or to Baron Samedi, in his black clothes and his black Tonton glasses, hungry for the dead? The priest knew, and perhaps the man who paid for the ceremony, and I suppose the initiates could read the hieroglyphs of ash. The ceremony went on for hours before the climax. It was the face of Philippot that kept me awake through the chanting and the drum beats. Among the prayers were little oases of familiarity. Libera nos al malo, Agnus Dei. Holy banners swayed past inscribed to the saints. Panem nostrum quodid Danium da nobis vodi. Once I looked at the dial of my watch and saw in pale phosphorescence the hands approaching 3. The priest came in from his inner room, swinging a censer, but the censer which he swung in our faces was a trussed cock. The small, stupid eyes peered into my eyes, and the banner of St. Lucy swayed after it. When he had completed the circle of the Tonnelle de Hongan, put the head of the cock in his mouth and crunched it cleanly off, the wings continued to flap while the head lay on the dirt floor like part of a broken toy. Then he went down and squeezed the neck like a tube of toothpaste and added the rusty color of blood onto the ashes. patterns on the floor. When I looked to see how the delicate Philippot was accepting the religion of his people, I saw he was no longer there, and I would have gone too, but I was tied to Joseph, and Joseph was tied to the ceremony in the hut. The drummers became more reckless as the night advanced. They no longer tried to muffle the beats. Something was happening in the inner room, where the banners were stacked around an altar, and where a cross stood below a poker-work prayer, and presently a procession emerged. They were carrying what I thought at first was a corpse wrapped in a white sheet for burial. The head was covered and the black arm dangled free. The priest knelt beside the fire and blew the embers up into flames. They laid the corpse beside him, and he took the free arm and held it in the flames. As the body flinched, I realized it was alive. Perhaps the neophyte screamed. I couldn't hear because the drums and the chanting women, but I could smell the burning of the skin. The body was carried out, and another took its place, and then another. The heat of the flames beat on my face as the night wind blew through the hut. The last body was surely a child's. It was less than 3 feet long, and on its occasion the hung gun held the hand a few inches above the flame. He was not a cruel man. When I looked again across the tunnel, Philippe was back in his place, and I remembered that one arm had been held in the flames appeared as light as a mulatto's. I told myself it could not possibly have been Philippot's. Philippot's poem had been published in an elegant limited edition, bound in vellum. He had been educated like myself by the Jesuits. He had attended the Sorbonne. I remembered how he had quoted the lines of Baudelaire to me at the swimming pool. If Philippot was one of the initiates, what a triumph that would represent for Papadoc as he dragged his country down. The flames lit the photograph nailed on the pillar, and the heavy spectacles, the eyes staring at the ground as though at a body ready for dissection. Once he had been a country doctor, struggling successfully against typhoid. He had been a founder of the Ethnological Society. With my Jesuit training, I could quote Latin as well as the Hungan, who was now praying for gods of Dahomey to arrive. Corruptio optimi. It wasn't sweet Erzuli who came to us that night, although for a moment her spirit seemed to enter the hut and touch a woman who sat near Philippot, for she rose and put her hands over her face and swayed gently this way, gently that. The priest went to her and tore away her hands. She had an expression of great sweetness in the candlelight, but the Hugon would have none of her. Azelia was not wanted. We had not assembled tonight to meet the goddess of love. He put his hands on her shoulders and thrust her back on her bench. He had scarcely time to turn before Joseph was in the ring. Joseph moved in a circle. The pupils of his eyes turned up so high that I saw only the whites, his hands held out as though he was begging. He lurched upon his wounded hip and seemed on the point of falling. The people around me leaned forward with grave attention, as though they were watching for some signs to improve that the god was really there. The drums were silent, the singing stopped. Only the Hungan spoke in some language older than Creole, perhaps older than Latin, and Joseph paused and listened, staring up the wooden pillar, past the whip and Papadoc's face into the thatch where a rat moved, crackling the straw. Then the Hugon went to Joseph. He carried a red scarf and he flung it across Joseph's shoulders. Hugon Ferraille had been recognized. Someone came forward with a machete and clamped it in Joseph's wooden hand as though he were a statue waiting completion. The statue began to move. It slowly raised an arm, then swung the machete in a wide arc so that everyone ducked for fear it would fly across the tunnel. Joseph began to run, the machete flashing and cutting. Those in the front row scrambled back, so that for a moment there was panic. Joseph was no longer Joseph. His face ran with sweat, his eyes looked blind or drunk as he stabbed and swung, and where was his injury now? He ran without a stumble. Once he paused and seized the bottle. which had been abandoned on the dirt floor when the people fled. He drank a long draught and then ran on. I saw Philippot isolated on his bench. All those around him had fallen back. He leant forward watching Joseph, and Joseph ran across the floor towards him, swinging the machete. He took Philippot's hair in his hand, and I thought he was going to strike him down with the machete. Then he forced Philippot's head back and poured the spirit down his throat. Philippot's mouth belched liquid like a drain pipe. The bottle fell between them. Joseph revolved twice on the floor and fell. The drums beat, the girls chanted. Ogun Feral had come and gone. Philippot was one of the 3 men who helped carry Joseph into the room behind the tonneau. But as for me, I'd had enough. I went out into the hot night and drew a long breath of air, which smelt of wooden fire and rain. I told myself that I hadn't left the Jesuits to be the victim of an African god. The holy banners moved in the tonneau. The interminable repetitions went on. I returned to my car, where I sat waiting for Joseph to come back. If he could move so agilely in the hut, he could find his way without my help. After a while the rain came. I closed the windows and sat in stifling heat, while the rain fell like an extinguisher over the tonneau. The noise of the rain silenced the drums, and I felt as lonely as a man in a strange hotel after a friend's funeral. I kept a flask of whiskey in the car against emergencies, and I took a pull from it, and presently I saw the mourners going by, grey shapes in the black rain. Nobody stopped at the car. They divided and flowed past on either side. Once I thought I heard an engine start. Philippot must have brought his car, but the rain hid it. I should never have gone to this funeral. I should never have come to this country. I was a stranger. My mother had taken a black lover. She had been involved, but somewhere years ago I had forgotten how to be involved in anything. Somehow, somewhere I had lost completely the capacity to be concerned. Once I looked out and thought I saw Philippot beckoning to me through the glass. It was an illusion. Presently, when Joseph had not appeared, I started the car and drove home alone. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning, and too late to sleep, so that I was wide awake at 6 when the Tontong Makut drove up to the veranda steps and shouted to me to come down. So that was the end of Roman 1. Today is the 2nd of October.